Margaret Thompson, 68, had spent the last few years living alone in a small city apartment after her husband Richard passed away. When the letter arrived, informing her that Richard's childhood home, an old Victorian house at the edge of a quiet town, was now hers, she decided to move. The house had always felt like a second home to her, even though it had fallen into disrepair over the years. The house was isolated, surrounded by tall trees and overgrown weeds. Margaret wasn't bothered by its weathered appearance. The peeling paint and creaking floors only made it feel more familiar. She stood for a moment at the doorstep, hesitating, before she stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the silence almost oppressive. The house had been empty for so long, but it still felt like Richard was just around the corner. Margaret moved through the rooms slowly, as if savoring the memories. The living room looked almost the same. The worn armchair, the heavy curtains, the untouched fireplace. But there was something unsettling about the stillness of it all. In the hallway, she paused in front of a tall mirror. Her reflection seemed almost distant, as if the years had caught up with her in that one glance. She shook off the unease, telling herself it was just the quiet of the house playing tricks on her. Later, while exploring the attic, she found an old photo album. She opened it, expecting to see pictures of happier times, but one photo caught her eye. Richard, smiling, with a woman beside him that Margaret didn't recognize. The photo was old, and the caption was smudged. A strange feeling stirred within her. She closed the album quickly, but the feeling didn't leave. Margaret couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong with the house, that it was waiting for something or someone. That first night, Margaret didn't sleep well. The house was so quiet, it was almost as if it was listening to her. The floorboards creaked under her weight as she moved from room to room, trying to settle into a place that no longer felt like home. She had placed a few of Richard's old books on the shelves, but even their presence didn't seem to fill the emptiness of the rooms. By midnight, Margaret had given up trying to sleep. She wandered into the kitchen to make some tea, hoping the warmth of it would calm her. The house seemed to hum with silence around her, only the soft rustle of the curtains moving in the draft of the open window breaking the stillness. But then, as she stood by the counter, she caught a faint scent in the air. It was floral, strong and unmistakable, a perfume she didn't recognize. Margaret paused, her hand still on the kettle. It was subtle at first, but it grew stronger, filling the room. The scent was sweet, almost overpowering, and it reminded her of the perfumes worn by women who had once visited the house. But there was no one else here. She shook her head, attributing it to her tired mind playing tricks on her. Maybe the smell had lingered in the house from some forgotten time. But as she stood there, the smell grew more intense, as if the air itself was thickening with it. Her chest tightened. Margaret turned to leave the kitchen, but as she passed the living room, the scent followed her, clinging to the air, now almost suffocating. She stopped in the doorway and looked around, but the room was empty, as it had been all evening. Yet the smell seemed to be coming from the armchair Richard used to sit in, the one near the fireplace. The chair was undisturbed, but the air around it felt different. She stepped forward, her feet dragging against the cold floor. The scent was now so strong it felt almost alive. a presence that hung in the room like a ghost. Her breath quickened, and a shiver ran down her spine. Was it just her imagination? Or was someone, in the house with her? Margaret turned and hurried upstairs to bed, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. She locked the door behind her, pulled the blankets tight around her, and closed her eyes. But the scent lingered, even in the darkness. The next morning, as Margaret made her way down to the kitchen, she found something that made her stop in her tracks. A fine layer of dust had been disturbed on the counter, and a small cup of tea sat on the table. Steam was rising from it, though she was certain she had left the kitchen empty the night before. It was as if someone had been there. The day after the unsettling experience in the kitchen, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house, once a symbol of comfort, now felt like a place of shadows. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just the silence and the unfamiliarity of being alone here. But deep down, she knew something was off. As she sat in the living room sipping her tea, her thoughts kept drifting back to that strange perfume and the sensation of being watched. It felt as if the house itself was alive, holding secrets that had been buried long ago. Her unease was growing, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was imagining things. To take her mind off it, Margaret decided to visit Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly neighbor who had lived in the town for decades. Mrs. Whitaker had always been kind, always eager to chat about the past, and Margaret thought she might know more about the history of the house and its former inhabitants. The old woman greeted her warmly when Margaret arrived, but as they sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, the conversation soon turned to Richard. Margaret was curious, wanting to hear stories about him from a time before she had known him. She had heard bits and pieces over the years, but never anything too specific. Mrs. Whitaker, however, didn't hesitate to share. "Oh, Richard was quite the catch when he was young," Mrs. Whitaker said with a knowing smile. "He had quite the charm, you know. But there was a time, before he married you, of course, when he almost left for another woman." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Whitaker leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though revealing a secret. "There was a girl, a woman, I should say. She was beautiful, lively. Richard spent a lot of time with her, more than he ever spent with anyone else. They were inseparable, even though she wasn't from around here. It was all very sudden, and then, well, one day, she was gone." "Gone?" Margaret asked, confused. "What do you mean, gone?" "Well, people said she drowned. Drowned in the river, not far from here. They searched for her for days, but she was never found. But there were rumors, you know. Some said she hadn't drowned at all. Some thought she just disappeared, vanished without a trace." Margaret sat back in her chair, stunned. "I had no idea," she murmured. Mrs. Whitaker gave a knowing look. "Oh, no one did. Richard never spoke of it. Not to anyone. But I saw the way he looked after she was gone. He was changed. After that, he settled down with you, Margaret. And that was that." The conversation hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unspoken words. Margaret's mind was racing. She tried to picture the woman, the one Richard had loved before her. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Had she truly known everything about Richard? Or had there been a part of him she never truly understood? Later, when Margaret returned home, she couldn't shake the thought of that woman. She went to the attic once again, this time searching through old boxes, hoping to find something that would shed light on the past. After rummaging through some dusty papers, she found a set of old photographs. One of them caught her attention immediately. A picture of Richard, laughing with a woman Margaret didn't recognize. She stared at the photograph for a long time, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman in the photo had dark, wavy hair and a smile that seemed too carefree for someone who had been gone for so long. Margaret's fingers trembled as she turned the picture over. The caption was smudged, but she could make out a few words. Richard and Clara, Spring 1964. Clara. Margaret didn't know anyone named Clara. But there, in black and white, was the proof that Richard had loved someone else before her. Someone whose name she had never heard. Someone who had vanished without a trace. The realization sent a cold wave through her. She knew deep down that Richard had kept secrets from her. But this felt like something more. That night, Margaret walked past the hallway mirror and froze. In its reflection, she saw a woman standing behind her. Tall, with dark hair, wearing an old dress. Margaret turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. She looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there, staring at her with hollow eyes. The figure whispered, "You stole him from me," before vanishing like smoke. Margaret stumbled back, her heart racing. She knew who it was now. Clara, Richard's first love. The woman who had disappeared. Trembling, she hurried upstairs, feeling as though the house itself was watching her. She locked the door, but the chill of the encounter stayed with her. The house was no longer a home. It was a place of secrets, shadows, and things that should have stayed buried.